What is the thing we don't talk about in your family? I was always told by my family that my biological grandfather on my mom's side passed away in a rock climbing accident right before mom was born. I found out last year that what actually happened was while he was still attending a military college in the South in the 60s, my grandmother discovered that he liked to wear women's clothing after finding a box of dresses in his size in his closet. The next day, she came back to find him, and she and two of her brothers had to smuggle him out of the room and convince a coroner to rule it an accident. I'm honestly not even sure if everyone in the family knows the truth, but anyone who does sure as hell doesn't talk about it. To clarify a few things, first, just for privacy's sake, I'm not going to say what college this took place at. I feel a little guilty as is putting such a personal family story out on the internet without giving more identifying info on top of it. Second, to clarify, my grandmother found the dresses in his closet on campus, left out of shock and confusion, and then came back to his room on campus to find him gone. It didn't happen in their shared house or at her place. I apologize for the confusing wording. Third, in that time and place, and in the military as well as my religious, conservative family specifically, what he did to himself was beyond stigmatized, and any investigation into why my grandfather ended it all would have more than likely uncovered his secret and tarnished his memory in the community's eyes, hence the cover up. Fourth, I'm not entirely sure myself why he did it, and I'm sure being a military man from a deeply conservative Southern family, he more than likely struggled with depression and his identity. But from the way it was described to me, he ended it all because he couldn't live with the shame if his secret got out. Fifth, my mother was the one that told me this story, so I haven't heard it from the three people who were actually there, and probably never will. One of her brothers passed before I was born, and my grandmother is suffering from a degenerative mental illness that has completely destroyed her memory. Story 2. When I was about 5 years old, my mom, grandma, brother, and I were about an hour from home and we stopped to get gas. We went inside to pay, but were 13 cents short. My mom told the clerk, "Be right back, I'll go get it from the car." So we all go back to the car and my mom hands me 13 cents and asks me to go pay the clerk. I went inside and by now a line has formed. I waited in line, not realizing that I probably would have been fine to just go up to the front to just hand him the money. When I finally finished, I walked outside and I could see our minivan driving away. My family was nowhere to be found. They'd left without me in an unfamiliar neighborhood 50 miles from home. I got scared, but I can remember feeling like, surely this isn't as abnormal as it feels. They'll be right back, right? So I began to cry and I walked over and sat on a concrete slab next to the gas station. I'm not sure how long it was, but at least several minutes later, I finally saw the van returning. When they pulled up, my mom was bawling and she began hugging and kissing me and apologizing. Apparently, what happened was my brother, 7 years old, closed the heavy sliding door, and my mom, hearing that sound, assumed it was after I'd crawled back in, so she started to drive away. After all, how long would it take me to deliver 13 cents? The story definitely makes my mother look pretty bad, but because I was so young when it happened, and it was so out of character for her, I was never really mad at her. So for the next 15 years or so, we'd tell people that story and kind of laugh about it. My mom would laugh too. Turns out her laughter was forced. It tore her up inside any time we talked about it. She finally confessed to us how it made her feel, and we all just sort of agreed to never bring it up again. We weren't mad at her. We'd totally forgiven her for her mistake and made sure she knew that. But she was never really able to forgive herself. She's still around and is an amazing mother. We just never tell that story anymore. Story 3. My brother, who passed, we never ever talk about him. It's so strange. Growing up, I knew I had a brother and I knew he was hit by a car walking home. But I don't know anything about him aside from that. I've seen his pictures. I know what he looked like. I don't know anything about his personality, his likes or dislikes, the type of music he listened to. I once found his comics in my mom's closet when I was younger, but that was about it. It is almost like it's just a story and he wasn't a real person. It wasn't until my grandfather passed about 11 years ago that my mother and I walked to his grave. She broke down into an inaudible mess. Then it really hit me for the first time ever that he was a real person, as crazy as that sounds. I don't understand the pain of losing a child, but it hurts to see my mom mourn like that, almost as if it had just happened. The only time since then he was ever mentioned was by my dad a few months ago. Out of my mother, father, and sisters, I'm the tallest, and my dad told me how the only one of us who was taller than me was Jimmy, and how he always seemed to keep growing, how he probably would have towered over me. I almost cried. I wish I got to know him. As someone had suggested, I could check for archived information either by visiting a library to look for a news article and or obituary. I tried to search online for these things with no luck. I did, however, find archived yearbooks. I searched a couple before I found the school he went to. The first book was for 86, and on my phone, I couldn't find 87, the year he passed. Once I got to a computer, I was able to find it. After the sophomore class page, there was a nice memoriam for him. Also, I had his age wrong as I realized reading his memoriam. I had taken the year he was born and the year he passed and came up with 16, when, in fact, he was gone before his birthday that year, making him only 15. It was nice to read kind words about him and his apparent love for music. Since seeing this, I now feel the need to know what happened. Before, I had felt sad about it and decided I'd just never know. After this, it has in a way lit the fire to find out anything and everything I can. I'm nervous to ask family, but I just may. I will be doing what I can to find out anything on my own first. Story 4. When I was growing up, I always heard stories about my dad as a kid hanging out in his mom's tavern. The first time we visited his hometown, he showed us his house, which is on a crossroads and split level. Front door goes to the top floor. The basement or lower floor opens out the back, which has a small road and parking area, and that's where the tavern was. It wasn't until many years later that it dawned on me that my dad grew up during Prohibition. Grandma was a bootlegger. It gets better. His hometown is on a road that was considered a bootlegger's highway from Canada. He went through jump school in the same class as Henry Hill, whose life Goodfellas was based on. One night in my teens, a friend of his, who I'd never heard of, knocked on the door at 10 p.m. He and his two buddies, all Italian, wanted a place to sleep for the night. They were gone in the morning. His pension and the work he did after he retired couldn't possibly explain our lifestyle. Mom has forbidden me from digging into it any further. Since when did any of us do what our parents told us to? Dig, my dude, dig. Story 5. That my parents perished from AIDS in the early 90s when I was 2. Growing up, I never knew how my mother passed, and I was told my father just disappeared. I remember throwing a tantrum in middle school for wanting to know what really happened to my parents. My aunt finally told me the truth, well, more yelled at me about it. I remember crying alone in my room for hours. I'm pretty sure their passing was the starting point for how strange my family is. Anyhow, my family hasn't mentioned it since then, and I'm now 27. As far as I know, we've never said the words HIV or AIDS aloud in my family. If it must be talked about, it's that disease or something similar. My friends constantly wonder why I never mentioned my parents, and I still have hang-ups telling people why and how they passed away. It makes me feel so conflicted inside because I know I should have nothing to feel ashamed of, but my family and society makes me feel like my parents' passing should be swept under the rug. I want to make it clear we do talk about my mother. She isn't forgotten. Just her death and the exact cause is something that is avoided at all costs. Story 6. My grandfather remarried a woman who almost immediately developed Alzheimer's and forgot who he is. He is now dating his first wife while his actual wife is confused who anyone is. He refuses to divorce because the scumbag family of his second wife bailed when they saw how expensive she was going to be, and my family had to get her care because she was too much for my grandfather to take care of. He's almost 90. I called out the relevant members of her family for bailing and was told I was being rude, which might be true, but I'm also freaking right. Story 7. My uncle and his friend, who's been around since I can remember, almost 30 years. They've never had a female companion. They live together. Damn, they even owned a gay bar at some point. Very Catholic family, so that's probably why they never came out. I thought it was something they kept from us, the kids, all these years until I had the courage to ask my dad, And he said that's never been discussed, that he has never even asked my mom about it. They seem happy and travel all the time, so that's awesome. I just wish they could just be who they are around their loved ones. I find something kind of sweet about this. Seems like his family's religion makes it damn near impossible for them to fully, openly discuss and accept his uncle and his boyfriend, so they just accept it and don't talk about it. Certainly beats the alternatives, which are disowning him or incessantly discussing when he's going to finally get a wife and settle down. But what we should openly discuss is how about you hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel so you wouldn't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Done? All right, now let's go ahead and get back to the stories. Story 8. My uber Catholic grandparents met when my grandpa was married. He left his wife, my grandmother got pregnant, and they eloped in the 40s. My grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 27. He took her to her senior prom. No one knew about this until last year, and my uncle was born early. Apparently, no one in my family can do math and never added up the birth and marriage dates. Story 9. Oh God, this brings up memories. My grandmother worked for a mob business as their bookkeeper. She passed when I was in high school, and while I knew there was something weird, I didn't put it together for a long time. When she got sick, they covered her medical bills completely to what had to have been several million over her last few years. Spending days at her office watching everything was fascinating to me, and I was just a little kid. I found out as I got older that they had an arranged marriage planned for me. I was literally a child when that happened, and it was a huge part of why we moved away. I've spent 15 minutes typing this just to make sure I don't say anything that could trace them given the other details in my post history. Thing about the mob is you are family. I come from completely dysfunctional lineage, the byproduct of the Great Depression and World Wars. I was born to teenage parents who carried all of the weight of their parents. It's easy to overlook everything wrong with a family if they take care of you. And that family was better than her own, and I understand the appeal. To anyone who may see this, thank you for making her last years easier. She died a bitter woman, but if it weren't for your generosity, she would have died indignantly. Thank you. Story 10. It was Thanksgiving. My parents had recently returned from Hawaii. My dad wanted to show everyone the photos. He connected the digital camera to the giant flat screen TV and started up a slideshow of my mother, bare, in their bedroom. He scrolled through several and then quickly turned it off and said, "Whoops, wrong cartridge." I was 21 and my boyfriend was with me for the holidays for the first time. My mom started crying. My boyfriend went silent. I just said, "Oh my God," somehow my 100-year-old grandma missed the whole thing. We never speak of it. If it is brought up, my mother will yell, "We swore to never mention that," and get red-faced. Story 11. Okay, to break the chain of secret girlfriends and estranged relatives, my family does not talk about cottage cheese. I can tell you want to hear more about this. For that, we must start at the beginning. My father is a lover of all things dairy. He would drink so much milk as a child, his mother would tell him, "You either have to become a dairy farmer or marry a farmer's daughter." And dear Dad did just that when he and my mom tied the knot. Dad also loves cheese, solid cheese, soft cheese, and cottage cheese. Dad is, however, very squeamish. He cannot stand the sight or thought of blood, body fluids, or cheese curds. This makes enjoying his cottage cheese by the quart difficult. No one is allowed to talk about cheese, curds, whey, or how it is all made when he is enjoying his snack. If you make the mistake of mentioning any of these things, Dad ends the conversations by throwing his hands in the air and yelling, "We don't talk about that." Story 12. My mother's mental and physical cruelty to both me and my sister during our childhoods. Can't talk about it with her because the conversation never goes anywhere. Same crap every time I try to bring it up to get the smallest bit of closure. That never happened. Turns to, "Well, if it happened, it didn't happen like that," to, "Well, if it happened like that, then you provoked me and it's all your fault." On a certain level, she believes she genuinely was not cruel because what she did to me was much more mild than the even more cruel upbringing she had herself, and she thinks the fact that she did better means she did good. Can't talk about it with my sister because she's much older than I am and got the heck out of the house the second she could, not that I blame her, and wrote off the entire family, not only my mom, but also me and everyone else. And I've never had any relationship with her and have been rebuffed when I've tried to reach out. Can't talk about it with extended family because my mother never did anything in front of them and I'm a perpetual screw up, so I have zero credibility. Tried talking to an aunt I used to be close to about it once and she scolded me for making up stories and immediately told my mother what I had said. I knew that if she didn't believe me, none of the rest of them would and never tried again. This sounds like the narcissist's prayer. That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. And if it is, then it's not my fault. And if it was, I didn't mean it. And if I did, you deserved it. Story 13. My dad never talks about his sister. She stole thousands from her father, fled to New Mexico, and is now hosting my great uncle and waiting for him to pass so she can claim his belongings. I don't know if he's actually going to do anything to her, but she seems certain. I haven't seen my aunt in over a decade, but she's a real piece of work. My mom complains about it a lot, but the rest of her family doesn't really like to admit that they don't talk to her too much. There was some big drama years ago where they fought over mom's parenting. This was largely because of me. And since then, my mom's sister and parents rarely speak to her. My family also refused to talk about or acknowledge my parents' disciplinary methods, which involved taking one of us unruly children, throwing us in a tub of cold water, and dunking our heads under it repeatedly while yelling at us. They did this for years anytime one of us got seriously out of line. They also once force-fed my sister mustard because she hates it. Maybe you can see why my relatives disagreed with mom's parenting. Story 14. My biological dad showed up last summer, 27 years of never having contact with me, and he comes out of nowhere. Turns out he just wanted me as a bone marrow/kidney donor for his other son. I agreed to be checked if I was a match, not gonna blame the 10-year-old kid for his father being a competitor for biggest jerk. But my family and I don't talk about it because I went behind my mother's back to talk to him in the first place after he showed up. Story 15. Around my grandfather, his brother Peter. Peter was a real piece of work, likely bipolar and psychotic, never diagnosed back in the day. He made my great-grandparents afraid but calmed down as he aged, thankfully as it let my grandfather leave home as he didn't need to protect them. My great-grandmother passed away early, but my great-grandmother passed just after my little bro was born. A few years before she passed, she was offered by Peter and his wife to look after her. There was a small cottage on the property, and the deal was if she let them take over the house, she would have the cottage and they would make sure she was all right, clean, etc. My other great-grandparents actually did this as well with my grandmother's sister, and it was the perfect arrangement. But instead, Peter used it to get the house signed over. They then packed up a bag with her clothes and dropped her at a state nursing home. She passed there. My grandfather tried to organize to move her, but by the time he found out they were in Britain, we are in Canada, she was too feeble to be safe to move. She would pass there. Almost all of her stuff had been taken by Peter, bank account drained, belongings taken, etc. Only a few pieces of her jewelry survived when she had realized what was going to happen, but after signing, she collected what she could and secretly mailed them across the ocean to our family. It is for that reason, at least, that our family has the garnet watch that the men passed down, the family rings, and a few other pieces. All the rest would be taken by Peter. So we don't talk about Peter. And I think if my grandfather ever saw him again, he would end him, saying, "Screw the consequences." Peter didn't even show up to the funeral for a reason. Story 16. The Parrot from Hawaii. When I was in kindergarten, my family took a trip to Honolulu. While there, a man on the street asked if we wanted photos with his parrots. My sisters and I were jazzed up about it, so my parents said, okay. The man had each of us holding a parrot or a parrot sitting on our shoulder as my mom snapped some pics. Then the man asked my dad to kiss the parrot. My dad was not about this. He was not going to kiss the parrot, but to make my family happy and to get away from Parrot Man, he did. And that's when the parrot chomped his lip, red and everything. To this day, over 10 years later, mention of the parrot will incite a 20-minute rant from my dad regarding parrot negligence, and then he gets so mad he has to go fix something in the garage. Do not bring up the parrot. For the sake of y'all kind strangers, I told my dad about his fame. He's proud to know there are so many of you against parrot negligence, and now he's off to fix something in the garage. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy What's Your Dark Family Secret? Story 2 is unbelievably wild. You gotta hear it to believe it. I'll see you in that video, and thank you for watching this one.